We are now less than 2 months away from COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, but there are still very many questions about whether it should even be going ahead because of the ongoing pandemic and, of course, the impact that it will have, that it could have on some of the world's developing countries that are being severely impacted by climate change. And I just want to ask both of you, and coming to you, Jen, first. I know that you're a pro of these summits, aren't you? I think you've been to 9 already. Are we ready for Glasgow?
You know, it's impossible to tell. The UK wants to host a business as usual, huge global event in times that are anything but usual. The problem is that a lot of countries are saying they can't come between travel restrictions, vaccine inequities, the added costs of self-isolating, for example. So those most affected by climate change are the least able to actively participate in this COP.
So in your mind, is that reason to postpone?
Yeah, this is a really high-risk strategy to hold this now. All the other major UN meetings related to the environment, and even some others, they've all been postponed to 2022 at least. So we're holding this one now, and I don't see the benefits of postponing it or of holding it now versus postponing it. What we need is action that's already coming through pledges. We need added finance, and we don't need people to show up in Glasgow to make those pledges or make those announcements. They can do it from home.
Mohamed, let's bring you in here. I know you have originally called for it to be postponed. It's not going to happen, is it? I mean, do you think that it could do more harm than it does good if it goes ahead?
I'm afraid if the UK government cannot hold a safe and accessible summit, then they will have to consider postponing it. They promised to vaccinate delegates, by the beginning of September, but we're still waiting. I'm on the list for a UK vaccine. Many civil society delegates have already cancelled their trips, meaning many important voices from the front lines of the climate crisis won't be present in Glasgow in person. Accommodation is also hugely expensive. Travel routes remain disrupted. And we also understand now that COVID rates are actually higher in Scotland than in many red list countries. So I want us to have a safe summit more than anyone. But the idea of traveling to Glasgow in November with COVID rates spiking is scary.
And Jen, you could see a scenario where some of the delegates from some of these countries, they could be joining virtually, if not there in person. You don't think that that's going to work by the sounds of it, because what people often say about these summits is that the real agreements, the real sort of broker deals are made in face-to-face, sort of on the sidelines conversations.
Yeah, I can't count the number of times that the last sort of piece of the solution or of the agreed outcome arrives in a huddle of 50 people on the floor of plenary at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can't do that virtually. And as far as I know, the UK hasn't made any provisions for virtual participation in the actual negotiations.
Well, that's troublesome, isn't it? One of the big pieces that needs to be put in place, and it was pledged ages ago, wasn't it? I think Copenhagen was this $100 billion a year financing for developing countries to be able to meet some of these climate goals. It hasn't materialised. How optimistic are you, Mohamed, that we'll get something over the line?
I think hopefully the world can learn from the mistakes that we've made with the COVID vaccine rollout. The fact that vaccines haven't been distributed fairly around the world has allowed, variants like Delta to actually emerge. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? The fortunate thing with climate, and there are a lot of parallels, I think, between climate and COVID, is that in the case of climate, and particularly climate finance, we've been negotiating this for donkey years. The rich world, led by the US, but also including every other rich nation, promised 10 years ago to provide $100 billion to some of the most vulnerable countries in the developing world. That hasn't materialized. And now we are in 2021. And so what we're looking for, and starting actually with this week, UN General Assembly, is for the US particularly, given the years we've lost under the Trump administration, for Biden to step up and actually deliver the promise that Obama made in 2009 towards supporting the vulnerable countries. I think between them, the rich world can actually mobilize more than 100 billion to support the much needed mitigation actions, but also adaptation actions in the developing countries. I think we are much behind in terms of delivering solidarity to some of the most vulnerable countries. And these things needs to be addressed before Glasgow. So it doesn't really need to wait for Glasgow. And the same goes for adaptation support, but also dealing with some of the losses and damages that we can no longer be able to adapt to. These are things that have been on the agenda for the COP, and they don't have to wait actually for Glasgow. They can start making some of those things happen even before we get to Glasgow.
Jen, is that not a powerful argument for going ahead with COP26 at its intended date? Because then you've got a hard stop. So you've got something that you're working towards. The eyes of the world are going to be on that summit, and you might well get those climate pledges, the climate finance pledges, over the line, more countries to commit if they know that they have that hard date to work towards.
It's this strange irony. We don't need COP for climate action. We need countries to pledge, set targets, and deliver on promises like finance. But having these types of deadlines, having media attention focused on this issue for 2 weeks, having civil society pushing for action, that helps. And so even though it's not an actual function or purpose of COP, one of the things that it does do is galvanize attention and pressure governments. It's sad that we need this. It's sad we need that kind of pressure, but it is one of the things that COP can do, even though it shouldn't be necessary for countries and governments to do the right thing.